The emergency room at St. Jude's Hospital was a microcosm of organized chaos, a perpetual state of controlled pandemonium. Bright fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a clinical glare on the polished linoleum floors. The air thrummed with a symphony of urgent sounds, the insistent beep, beep, beep of heart monitors, the hushed murmurs of doctors and nurses, the rapid clatter of gurneys being wheeled through swing doors, and the occasional piercing cry of pain. It was a place where minutes often felt like hours, and every second could mean the difference between life and death. In the heart of this relentless maelstrom moved Alara Vance, a young nurse who, to most, was as unremarkable as the sterile white walls. Alara possessed a quiet efficiency that allowed her to blend seamlessly into the background. She moved with a purpose, her steps light yet deliberate, her hands performing their tasks with a practiced grace that belied her years. She administered medications, changed dressings, updated charts, and offered comforting words to anxious families, all with an almost invisible precision. While other nurses might engage in lively banter or animated discussions about weekend plans, Alara often kept to herself, her focus unwavering on the immediate needs of her patients. Her calm demeanor, however, was frequently mistaken for timidity, her quiet dedication overlooked in a profession that often rewarded outward displays of confidence and vocal assertiveness. At the height of the midday rush, when the ER was overflowing with new admissions and the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee, Alara finally found a moment to retreat. She didn't head to the main lounge, where a boisterous group of doctors and nurses shared stories, their laughter echoing through the semi-private space. Instead, she slipped into a cramped, windowless break room, tucked away behind the supply closet. It was a utilitarian space, smelling faintly of old coffee and industrial cleaner, with just enough room for a chipped plastic table and 2 rickety chairs. She unwrapped her quickly prepared meal, a plain turkey sandwich and a bruised apple. She ate in silence, her gaze distant, not on the peeling paint of the walls, but on something unseen, perhaps a thought or a memory. After finishing, she meticulously organized her small workstation in the break room corner, aligning her pen and notepad with surgical precision. There was a quiet intensity in her eyes, a depth of focus that often went unnoticed. Tucked away in her bag was a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. Occasionally, when she believed no one was looking, she would pull it out and, with a fine-tipped pen, sketch intricate mechanical diagrams, gears, pistons, complex wiring schematics. It was a private hobby, a secret language she spoke with herself, a part of her world she kept carefully hidden from the demanding, human-focused chaos of the ER. The relative peace of the break room was shattered by a sudden, frantic shout from the main ER bay. Code blue gurney on the loose. Alara sprang from her seat, her sandwich half-eaten. Back in the main bay, a new, visibly flustered orderly, barely out of training, had accidentally tripped over a critical IV stand. The metal pole wobbled precariously, threatening to dislodge a patient's life-sustaining drip. The IV pump blared an alarming warning, and the patient on the gurney, already pale and weak, moaned faintly. Panic flared among the nearby staff. A senior nurse rushed forward, but her movements were clumsy, hampered by the speed and the unexpected nature of the emergency. Alara, however, didn't hesitate. Without a single word, she moved with a surprising swiftness that belied her quiet demeanor. Her steps were economical, direct. She didn't shove or push, but rather, with an uncanny ability to navigate the chaos. She reached the IV pole just as it began its final tilt. Her hands, usually so gentle when tending to patients, were strong and steady as they gripped the pole, preventing its fall. The IV pump silenced its alarm, the drip continuing uninterrupted. She offered a calm, reassuring smile to the mortified orderly, whose face was flushed crimson with embarrassment. "It's all right," she murmured, her voice soft but firm. "Just be careful next time." She then smoothly adjusted the IV bag, ensuring its secure placement, before moving back to her duties, her action almost unseen in the continued rush of the ER. To most, it was just another nurse doing her job, a small, unremarkable act of competence. But the orderly, his eyes wide with gratitude and a touch of awe, wouldn't soon forget her quiet intervention. As the shift continued, Alara often found herself in the older, less frequented parts of the hospital, the dimly lit corridors leading to seldom-used examination rooms, the echoing stairwells descending to the hospital's aging infrastructure. These areas, largely ignored by the modern high-tech core of the ER, held a peculiar fascination for her. She knew their layouts intimately, often taking shortcuts through disused service tunnels that dated back to the hospital's founding, or accessing forgotten utility closets that hummed with ancient, neglected machinery. Sometimes, she would pause, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to a faint, rhythmic hum emanating from deep within the building's bowels. The distant thrum of boilers, the clatter of ancient ventilation systems, the steady pulse of mechanical life that kept the old hospital breathing. She could distinguish between the healthy drone and a subtle, nascent irregularity, a sound that would register as nothing but background noise to anyone else. It was an unusual intimacy for a nurse, a knowledge born of something beyond her medical training, a faint, almost imperceptible smell of grease and diesel. Not typical for her scrubs, occasionally clung to her after these brief detours, a detail unnoticed by most of her colleagues, who were too focused on the immediate, pressing human dramas unfolding around them. It was a secret language she shared with the old building, a quiet acknowledgement of the hidden forces that kept St. Jude's running. This silent connection, this deep-seated understanding of the mechanical heart of the hospital, was a small, crucial piece of a past that was about to collide with her present. The precarious calm of St. Jude's ER was often shattered by the arrival of Dr. Julian Thorne. He was a force of nature, a brilliant and highly sought-after top surgeon whose reputation preceded him like a sonic boom. His skill with a scalpel was legendary, his diagnoses often bordering on the prescient, but his bedside manner, particularly with junior staff, was infamous. He possessed an arrogance born of undeniable talent, a short temper, and a profound disdain for anything less than absolute perfection. To Dr. Thorne, the ER was a meticulously orchestrated machine, and any cog that dared to falter was a personal affront. Working closely with Dr. Thorne, and often fueling his prejudices, was Nurse Bethany. Sharp-eyed and sharper-edged, Bethany was a master of subtle manipulation, a professional chameleon who could shift from empathetic caregiver to ruthless schemer in a blink. She cultivated an air of indispensable efficiency around Dr. Thorne, whispering criticisms and planting seeds of doubt about others, all to secure her own precarious position in the highly competitive medical hierarchy. Her gaze often lingered on Alara, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips, a silent promise of future trouble. Bethany saw Alara's quiet nature not as humility, but as weakness, an opportunity to climb higher. The problem, the catalyst that would shatter Alara's quiet existence, arrived with the piercing wail of an ambulance siren. A critical trauma patient, the victim of a high-speed collision, was rushed into the ER. The bay instantly transformed into a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Orders were barked, equipment was prepped, and the air crackled with a frantic urgency. Dr. Thorne, already at the patient's side, assessed the situation with terrifying speed, his movements precise, almost surgical, even outside the operating room. "Internal bleeding," he declared, his voice clipped and urgent. "Massive. We need to stabilize and get them into OR3 now." The team sprang into action, a whirlwind of white coats and blue scrubs. Dr. Thorne demanded absolute precision. There was no room for error, no margin for delay. Every instrument, every medication, every piece of sterile gauze had to be precisely where he expected it, when he expected it. It was in this crucible of high-stakes emergency that Bethany saw her opportunity. as the surgical prep reached its frenetic peak, just as Dr. Thorne extended his hand for a crucial instrument, the specialized trauma clamp, Bethany, with a practiced, almost imperceptible movement, subtly misplaced it. It wasn't far, just pushed slightly behind a stack of sterile towels, but enough to cause a critical, agonizing delay. The clamp! Nurse Thorne roared, his voice tight with impatience, his hand still outstretched. Now! A frantic search ensued. The junior nurses fumbled, their eyes wide with panic. Alara, however, having observed the subtle shift in Bethany's posture moments before, and always acutely aware of the flow of the instrument tray, knew exactly where to look. With her usual quiet efficiency, she reached behind the towels and retrieved a sterile replacement, handing it to Thorne with practiced swiftness. "Here, doctor." But the damage was done. Thorne, already stressed to the breaking point by the patient's rapidly deteriorating condition and the perceived delay, saw only the momentary hiccup. He snatched the clamp, his eyes blazing, and unleashed a public, humiliating tirade against Alara. His voice, usually reserved for the operating room, sliced through the tense ER air, drawing the attention of every staff member and even some anxious family members in the waiting area. Nurse Vance. Thorne's voice was a whip crack, laced with withering disdain. "Are you utterly incompetent? Do you understand the meaning of urgent? This is not a knitting circle. Lives are at stake. Your carelessness, your sloppiness, is a liability. Perhaps you should stick to Band-Aids and temperature checks, where your unique talents might be better utilized." He sneered, his gaze sweeping over her, dismissing her entirely. "Now, get out of my sight. Send someone competent." The words cut deep, sharper than any scalpel. Alara felt a deep flush of shame spread across her face, her cheeks burning, her head bowed instinctively, her gaze falling to the gleaming floor. The public humiliation was searing, the injustice of it a bitter taste in her mouth. She felt the familiar sting of being underestimated, dismissed as less than, her quiet competence utterly disregarded. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled almost imperceptibly. She heard the murmurs of sympathy from a few junior nurses, the knowing glances shared by others. However, as she stood there, absorbing the vitriol, something stirred within her. A quiet defiance. A spark, long suppressed, began to glow. She remembered her late grandfather, a brilliant but eccentric engineer who had taught her everything she knew about machines, about problem-solving, about the beauty of intricate systems. He had faced similar dismissals, his unconventional genius often misunderstood by a rigid world. His words, "Never let them dim your light, Alara, even if they don't understand its source," echoed in her mind. She thought of his calloused hands, his eyes that saw beyond the superficial, and her own quiet pride in her capabilities, which had been dismissed so casually by Thorne. Following Thorne's humiliating tirade, Bethany moved quickly to capitalize on the moment. She ensured that Alara was assigned to the most undesirable, menial tasks. She was relegated to restocking obscure supply closets in forgotten wings of the hospital, delivering laundry to the basement, and cleaning biohazard spills, tasks typically handled by orderlies or junior staff. It was a clear, systematic attempt to isolate her, to push her to the margins, effectively threatening her entire career at St. Jude's. Alara found herself scrubbing floors in rarely used examination rooms, her hands, still tingling from the surgeon's harsh words, methodically working. She was physically exhausted, emotionally drained. The systematic undermining, the deliberate relegation to menial duties, was more insidious than any single outburst. It threatened not just her job, but her very sense of self-worth, her identity as a capable, compassionate nurse. This wasn't merely a bad day. It was a crisis of confidence, a threat to her future. A profound realization settled upon her. She could not simply endure this, could not simply fade back into the background, allowing herself to be swallowed by the hospital's oppressive hierarchy. This systematic erosion of her professional standing, fueled by Bethany's subtle malice and Thorne's blinding arrogance, had pushed her to a critical juncture. She could not go back to being invisible, to being a nameless cog in a machine that now actively sought to discard her. The choice was stark disappear, or fight for her place. The memory of her grandfather, the quiet strength he embodied, spurred her on. The point of no return had been reached. The hospital, though a monument to modern medicine, was a patchwork of eras. While the ER shimmered with the latest technology, its deeper arteries pulsed with the legacy of decades past. Alara, relegated to the older, often forgotten sections of St. Jude's, found herself drawn to these hidden spaces. The quiet hum of ancient pipes, the faint scent of stale dust, and the subtle groan of the building's skeletal structure were a comfort. A familiar language that spoke to a part of her soul the bustling ER could not reach. One blustery afternoon, a minor electrical fluctuation rippled through the hospital. Lights flickered momentarily, plunging sections of the ER into a brief, unsettling dimness before the modern systems rerouted power. The hiccup was quickly resolved, but it sent a ripple of unease through the already frayed nerves of the staff. Dr. Thorne, fresh from a delicate procedure, dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Just a glitch in the grid," he announced, his voice carrying an air of dismissive authority. "Nothing to worry about." However, not everyone shared his complacency. Valerie, a seasoned senior nurse with decades of experience at St. Jude's, had seen too many glitches turn into full-blown crises. She had a quiet, almost maternal concern for the hospital's aging infrastructure, often muttering under her breath about the need for proper maintenance of the older systems. She shot a worried glance at Alara, whose face, though composed, held a hint of knowing concern. As part of her latest humiliating assignment, Alara was sent to the hospital's sub-basement, a sprawling, rarely visited labyrinth of concrete and machinery. Largely untouched since the 1970s, the air was cool and damp, thick with the metallic tang of old oil and the faint, earthy scent of concrete. It was a realm of dusty pipes, decommissioned equipment, and the rhythmic, almost subconscious thrum of the old auxiliary generator, a colossal relic that stood as a testament to a bygone era of brute force engineering. Alara moved through the gloom, her flashlight beam cutting through the motes of dust dancing in the stale air. As she approached the generator, a sound, subtle yet ominous, reached her ears. It wasn't the usual low, steady hum she had come to recognize. This was a faint sputter, a hesitant, almost wheezing noise, followed by an irregular vibration that resonated through the concrete floor beneath her feet. To anyone else, it would have been dismissed as the normal eccentricities of old machinery. To Alara, it was a distress signal, a mechanical cough that spoke of impending failure, not just a momentary glitch in the power grid. It was the sound of something deeply, fundamentally wrong. She instinctively stopped, her nursing duties momentarily forgotten. Her hand reached out, not to the main control panel, but to a series of old, discolored gauges on the side of the massive machine. Her fingers, usually trained for delicate medical procedures, moved with an unexpected familiarity, tracing the lines of pipes, feeling the temperature of conduits. She understood the flow of power, the intricate dance of hydraulics and electrical currents, as intimately as she understood the human circulatory system. She quickly identified potential failure points. Her casual, almost intuitive manipulation of the archaic levers and gauges a silent testament to her hidden talents. She saw a slight drip from a fuel line, a loose connection on an ancient relay. These weren't problems for a modern engineer with a tablet. They were issues that required a deep, almost instinctual understanding of analog mechanics. She knew what to tighten, what to check, where the pressure points were, as if the machine itself was speaking to her. Unbeknownst to Alara, She wasn't entirely alone. Valerie, still nursing her quiet concerns about the electrical fluctuation, had decided to independently check on the old generator. She was worried that the brief power dip might have stressed the ancient system. She made her way through the dimly lit sub-basement, her footsteps echoing, and then she saw her, Ilara, the quiet, dismissed young nurse, stood before the hulking generator, her face illuminated by the single bare bulb overhead, her hands moving with a confidence and knowledge that sent a jolt of surprise through Valerie. She saw Ilara casually identify a loose clamp, then tighten it with a wrench she seemed to produce from nowhere, her movements precise and assured. Valerie watched, her breath held, utterly captivated. Just as Valerie stepped out of the shadows, another figure appeared, moving stealthily through the gloom. It was Nurse Bethany. Driven by a blend of professional jealousy and a desire to ensure Ilara remained exactly where Thorne wanted her, performing menial tasks, Bethany had followed Ilara, intending to check on her progress. She saw a glimpse of Ilara's uncanny expertise, enough to make her heart clench with a mixture of suspicion and a cold, professional fear. Ilara wasn't just a docile, easily dismissed junior nurse. There was something more, something dangerous to Bethany's carefully constructed dominance. Valerie approached Ilara slowly, her expression a mix of surprise and burgeoning respect. "Ilara," she asked, her voice hushed. "What? How do you know all this?" Her tone was devoid of the usual condescension Ilara encountered. It was genuine curiosity, a desire to understand. Ilara, startled, quickly straightened, her natural inclination to deflect returning. "Oh, it's just something my grandfather taught me," she mumbled, waving a dismissive hand. "He was a mechanic. He loved old machines." She tried to make it sound like a trivial, childhood hobby. But Valerie's curiosity was piqued. Her initial impression of Ilara as a meek, unassuming nurse shattered by the display of unexpected mechanical prowess. She saw a glimmer of something profound beneath Ilara's quiet exterior. Bethany, hidden behind a stack of old medical crates, had witnessed the exchange. Her initial dismissal of Ilara as an irrelevant rival turned into a flicker of deep-seated professional jealousy. This wasn't just a nurse. This was someone with a hidden, potentially valuable skill. A skill that could threaten Bethany's carefully cultivated image of indispensable efficiency. Especially to Dr. Thorne. She retreated quickly, her mind already formulating a plan. Later that shift, Bethany found a moment alone with Dr. Thorne. "Doctor," she began, her voice subtly laced with concern, "I've noticed something rather peculiar about Nurse Vance. She seems to have an unusual interest in the restricted areas, especially the old machinery in the sub-basement. I even saw her tinkering with the auxiliary generator. It seems odd for a nurse, doesn't it? Perhaps a distraction from her actual duties, or just unusual behavior." She managed to imply a sense of impropriety, hinting at distractions or odd behavior without making direct accusations. Dr. Thorne, still annoyed by Ilara's perceived incompetence and her earlier blunder in the ER, waved his hand dismissively. "Vance, let her tinker with whatever dusty old relic she wants. As long as it keeps her away from the actual patients. I need nurses who can handle pressure, not mechanical curiosities." He dismissed it as irrelevant, his arrogance preventing him from seeing the hidden warning. But he filed it away, adding to his existing prejudice against Ilara, solidifying his belief that she was fundamentally ill-suited for the demands of modern medicine. He allowed his personal bias to blind him to a critical piece of information. The quiet confrontation had set the stage. Ilara's secret, or at least a glimpse of it, was out. Valerie was now aware of Ilara's hidden depth, a potential ally, and Bethany, a cunning adversary, now had a new weapon to wield against Ilara, turning her unique talent into a perceived flaw, the ancient generator, a symbol of forgotten power, now hummed its ominous warning, a prelude to the true test that awaited Alara, the unseen master of old machines. The stage was set for a dramatic unveiling, a moment where the quiet girl would be forced to show her true colors. The storm, when it finally broke, did so with the brutal suddenness of a tropical squall. It wasn't just a heavy rain, it was a furious tempest, ripping through the city with destructive force. Winds howled, trees bent to breaking point, and the sky turned an apocalyptic shade of bruised purple. And then, without warning, the lights in St. Jude's Hospital flickered once, twice, and died. A collective gasp, quickly followed by a chorus of panicked shouts, swept through the ER. The once brightly lit space plunged into a terrifying, murky dimness. The incessant beeping of machines abruptly ceased, replaced by the eerie silence of dead electronics. The frantic glow of smartphone flashlights became the only beacons in the sudden gloom. The main power grid had failed, taking with it all the modern automated backup systems, which inexplicably failed to kick in. The hospital, a fortress of medical technology, was suddenly vulnerable, its lifeblood severed. Dr. Julian Thorne, caught mid-sentence in the ER while reviewing a patient's chart, stood frozen. His surgical team, currently in OR3, was in the middle of a critical, life-saving procedure on the trauma patient. Their only illumination now came from the faint, unreliable glow of battery-powered surgical lights, their hum already sounding strained. The patient's life, hanging by a thread, now depended entirely on a few minutes of dwindling battery life. Panic spread like wildfire, a suffocating blanket of fear that threatened to overwhelm the disciplined calm of the medical professionals. The backup generators, Thorne roared, his voice laced with desperation. Get them online. Now. But the modern automated backup systems, designed to seamlessly transition, were inexplicably silent. A senior maintenance engineer, sweating profusely in the sudden lack of air conditioning, stumbled out of the utility room. Doctor, the main auxiliary system isn't responding. It's completely dead. We've got nothing. Despair began to creep into the faces of the ER staff. The hum of the critical life support machines, once robust, now emitted a weak, struggling whine, their battery indicators blinking ominously red. The only hope, a desperate, fading glimmer, lay in the hospital's true relic, the ancient, decommissioned auxiliary generator, tucked away in the dark, forgotten sub-basement, the very place where Alara had been sent on her humiliating assignments. The place where Dr. Thorne had dismissively told her to stick to Band-Aids. No one knew how to operate it. All the maintenance personnel who possessed that archaic knowledge had long since retired or moved on, taking with them the institutional memory of its complex, manual startup procedure. The new generation of engineers only knew digital controls, not the heavy levers, the intricate valves, the brute force required to coax life from that leviathan of a machine. Alara, standing quietly by a darkened nursing station, immediately understood the gravity of the situation. The faint sputter she had heard days ago, the subtle vibration she had felt, were no longer abstract warnings. They were prophecies fulfilled. The silence was deafening, amplified by the frantic whispers and choked sobs of patients and families. Despite her earlier humiliation, despite the stinging words of Dr. Thorne, her immediate thought was of the lives hanging in the balance. She stepped forward, her voice clear in the pervasive darkness. I know how to operate it, Doctor. Thorne, his face drawn with stress and panic, barely registered her. He was already shouting orders to others, frantically trying to find anyone who understood generators. When he finally turned to Alara, his eyes, wild with desperation, registered only the young nurse he had so recently berated. He dismissed her without a second thought, his prejudice outweighing the desperate need. Vance, this isn't a game. This requires actual mechanical knowledge, not nursing theory. Stay with the patients. Don't you dare leave your post. He waved her away, his voice laced with the same disdain he had shown earlier. Someone find a technician now. The humiliation was secondary now, eclipsed by the terrifying reality of the dying machines. Alara felt the sting, but it hardened her resolve. She realized she would have to prove herself alone, in the literal darkness, against the clock and against the ingrained prejudice of those around her. Back in OR3, the battery power on critical life support machines began to dwindle rapidly. A small digital timer on the anesthesia machine blinked a terrifying countdown. 4 minutes remaining. Every second was a lifetime. The patient on the operating table, already precariously balanced, was deteriorating fast. Dr. Thorne, now truly desperate, began sending anyone he could spare to the sub-basement. Find the old generator. Figure it out. There has to be a manual. One by one, junior doctors, nurses, even a few administrative staff ventured into the pitch-black descending stairwells, only to return defeated, their faces smudged with dust, their hands empty. They couldn't even locate the right controls in the labyrinthine darkness, let alone understand the complex, archaic machinery. Nurse Bethany, observing the escalating panic, moved through the ER with a deceptive air of helpfulness. While offering sympathetic words, she subtly misdirected those sent to the generator, giving vague, confusing instructions. She reveled in the chaos, enjoying Alara's continued perceived marginalization. "Oh, the generator, I think it's somewhere behind the old laundry chute. But it's very tricky," she'd murmur, sending them on futile wild goose chases, hoping the power failure would last just long enough to solidify Thorne's reliance on her, and permanently sideline Alara. Her ambition, cold and calculating, saw opportunity in catastrophe. Alara, realizing the full extent of the danger, the deliberate obfuscation, and the utter incompetence of others when faced with analog technology, knew she was the only one left. The lives in the OR, the entire hospital, rested on her shoulders. She slipped away from her post, her movements almost imperceptible in the frantic chaos. She raced against time, navigating the pitch-black, treacherous sub-basement alone. She didn't need a flashlight. Her internal map of the hospital's hidden veins and arteries was clearer than any blueprint. She moved through dusty corridors, past silent boilers, her hands instinctively feeling for the familiar cold touch of steel pipes, the texture of rough concrete walls. Each breath was a silent prayer, each step a testament to her grandfather's forgotten lessons. The hum of the dying machines in the ER was a distant, desperate call, urging her on. The gauntlet had been thrown. The unseen abyss awaited her, and Alara Vance, the quiet nurse with the engineer's soul, was ready to descend into its depths. The sub-basement was a black maw, swallowing the light from Alara's single, struggling penlight. The air grew heavy, damp, and cold, carrying the faint metallic scent of rust and stagnant water. Above, the hospital's frantic energy had dwindled to a terrifying silence, broken only by the distant, dying whir of machines and the rising chorus of anxious whispers. Alara, however, was no longer just a nurse. She was an engineer, guided by instinct, memory, and the ghostly lessons of her grandfather. She moved through the labyrinth of pipes and conduits, her hands brushing against cold, sweating metal. She felt the vibrations of long, dormant pumps, the precise angle of a forgotten valve. Her mind, unburdened by the chaos above, was singularly focused on the massive, archaic silhouette looming in the deepest recesses of the basement, the old auxiliary generator. It stood like a slumbering behemoth, a colossal iron beast encrusted with decades of dust and grime, its sheer size a testament to a bygone era of brute force engineering. The air around it felt heavy, charged with inert power. Alara reached the generator room, the beam of her penlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. It was a daunting space, filled with the looming shadows of silent machinery. She swallowed hard, a tiny flicker of apprehension in her chest, quickly extinguished by the urgency of the moment. The lives upstairs depended on her. Her eyes, now adjusted to the gloom, scanned the complex array of dials, levers, and gauges that adorned the generator's control panel. This wasn't a modern push-button system. This was a manual, mechanical beast that demanded a specific, almost ritualistic sequence of actions. She began her meticulous work, her hands moving with the precision of a seasoned engineer, each touch deliberate, purposeful. She remembered her grandfather's voice, a soft whisper from the past, describing the quirks and demands of such machines. First, she checked the oil levels, peering into the murky depths of the sight glass, confirming the dark, viscous liquid was adequate. Then, she moved to the valves, her fingers strong as they gripped the cold, rusty metal handles, systematically opening the fuel lines and adjusting the airflow dampers. The groan of the old metal resonated through the quiet room. She listened, feeling the subtle changes in the machine's internal pressure, knowing that an improper adjustment could seize the entire system. Next, she found the fuel pump, a heavy manual priming lever that required significant force. She gripped it, her muscles straining as she pumped, listening for the telltale gurgle of diesel filling the lines. Her breath hitched with the effort, a thin layer of sweat forming on her brow. This wasn't about sterile precision. It was about raw, physical exertion, coaxing a dormant giant back to life. Finally, with the fuel primed and the valves set, she moved to the heart of the challenge, the flywheel. It was a massive, heavy disc, designed to build inertia and kickstart the engine. She grasped the thick, cold handle. Her small frame braced against the immense weight. With a grunt, she began to crank. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, pouring all her strength into the rhythmic, circular motion. The sheer resistance of the old machinery was immense, the strain on her muscles excruciating. Each rotation was a battle, a test of her resolve. The only sounds were her labored breathing, the metallic squeal of the flywheel, and the faint, rasping cough of the engine attempting to catch. The generator shuddered. A faint cough echoed through the room. Then another. A flicker of hope ignited within her. She cranked harder, faster, sweat now stinging her eyes. The engine seemed to sputter, a brief, triumphant roar rising from its depths, only to immediately die. A sudden, agonizing silence descended, more profound and despairing than the darkness. The flywheel clunked to a halt. The air hung heavy, pregnant with failure. Alara slumped against the cold metal casing of the generator, her body trembling with exhaustion and crushing disappointment. A wave of despair washed over her. It had been so close, so agonizingly close. She felt the weight of every dying machine in the ER, every fading heartbeat, pressing down on her. Just as hope seemed utterly lost, a forgotten memory, a tiny, obscure detail from her childhood, pierced through the fog of her exhaustion. Her grandfather's voice, raspy with age and grease, echoing in her mind. Sometimes, Alara, these old beasts, they need a bit of a kick, a little coaxing, a specific trick to get that stubborn fuel line flowing proper, especially after a long sleep. He had described a particular valve, hidden almost out of sight, that sometimes needed a manual, momentary jolt to clear an airlock. With renewed, desperate energy, Alara scrambled around the massive engine, her penlight beam darting over its dusty surface. She found it, a small, almost invisible valve, tucked away beneath a tangle of old pipes. She fumbled with it, her fingers clumsy with fatigue. Then, with a desperate final attempt, she twisted it, released a tiny burst of air, and then quickly tightened it back. This was it, her last shot. She grabbed the flywheel handle again, summoning a strength she didn't know she possessed. She cranked it, her teeth gritted, pushing past the pain in her arms, past the crushing weight of the ticking clock. One rotation, two. The engine coughed again, a louder, more promising sound. Then, with a mighty shudder and a triumphant roar that vibrated through the entire sub-basement, The old auxiliary generator burst to life. Its rhythmic, powerful hum filled the cavernous space, growing steadily, powerfully, until it vibrated through the very foundations of St. Jude's Hospital. Back in the ER and OR, the flickering, dying lights suddenly surged. The low, mournful whir of life support machines swelled into a powerful, steady hum. The entire hospital was suddenly flooded with light, a blinding beacon of hope in the city's widespread blackout. In OR 3, Dr. Thorne, his face grim and sweat-streaked, was midway through a delicate, life-saving maneuver on his patient, relying purely on touch and the dim battery light. As the powerful surgical lights flared back to full luminescence, he looked up, his eyes wide with shock and dawning realization. He saw Alara Vance's face in his mind, the young nurse he had so scorned, and the magnitude of his error, the profound depth of her unacknowledged talent, hit him with the force of a physical blow. The staff in the ER erupted in a cacophony of cheers, shouts of relief, and even tears. Their faces, moments before etched with despair, transformed into overwhelming joy and gratitude. Valerie, who had been anxiously watching the battery life of a respirator, saw the lights return and immediately understood. She sprinted towards the sub-basement, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and immense pride. She found Alara, slumped against the now roaring generator, utterly exhausted but resolute, a quiet triumph shining in her eyes. News of the miracle spread like wildfire through the hospital. Then beyond its walls, the ER, now brightly lit, bustled with renewed purpose. Doctors and nurses, once demoralized, worked with a fresh surge of energy. The hospital administrator, who had been on the verge of a breakdown, was now dumbfounded, staring at the perfectly functioning systems. The story of the young nurse who had saved St. Jude's from total collapse began to circulate, morphing from a frantic whisper to a collective roar of admiration. The unseen cog had, against all odds, become the very engine of their salvation. Alara Vance, the berated nurse, had been vindicated, her quiet genius lighting up not just a hospital, but the very hearts of those who had dismissed her. The surge of light that flooded St. Jude's Hospital was more than just electricity. It was a wave of truth washing over the long-standing prejudices and hidden machinations within its walls. In the aftermath of the blackout, the narrative shifted rapidly. The story of Alara Vance, the unassuming young nurse who had single-handedly resurrected the hospital, became the singular focus of every conversation, every relieved sigh. Her quiet competence, once overlooked, now shone with an undeniable brilliance. Nurse Bethany's subtle sabotages and her malicious gossip, which had so effectively marginalized Alara, began to unravel with startling speed. Liam, the former orderly, now a fervent admirer of Alara, had witnessed Bethany's deliberate misdirection during the crisis. He courageously came forward, detailing how Bethany had sent frantic staff members on wild goose chases, deliberately wasting precious minutes while Alara raced against time. Valerie, the seasoned senior nurse, whose quiet observations had already sown seeds of doubt about Bethany's character, corroborated Liam's account with her own keen insights into Bethany's manipulative tendencies and her professional jealousy. The pieces clicked into place, revealing a pattern of calculated undermining. Confronted with irrefutable evidence and facing a swift internal investigation, Bethany was quietly but firmly dismissed from her position. Her ambition, once her driving force, had ultimately led to her professional ruin, leaving her with a tarnished reputation and a career in tatters. Dr. Julian Thorne, too, faced a reckoning. The public humiliation of his earlier tirade against Alara, amplified by the stark contrast of her heroic actions, weighed heavily on him. He was a brilliant surgeon, but his arrogance had nearly cost lives. Facing a rigorous disciplinary review for his past conduct and the severity of his misjudgment, Thorne found himself humbled in a way his ego had never allowed before. He saw the admiration and respect in the eyes of his colleagues for Alara, and he recognized the profound chasm between his perceived authority and her genuine life-saving skill. In a heartfelt public address to the hospital staff, his voice surprisingly subdued, he issued a sincere apology to Alara. "Nurse Vance," he stated, his gaze meeting hers, "my arrogance blinded me, my words were unjust, and my judgment was profoundly flawed. You demonstrated a level of competence and courage that saved this hospital, and more importantly, saved lives. I am deeply sorry for my actions and for every word I uttered." The apology was raw, genuine, and deeply impactful. Thorne, a changed man, chose to step down from his demanding role as head surgeon. He decided to focus on teaching and mentorship, dedicating himself to instilling not just surgical excellence, but also humility and a respect for every member of the medical team in the next generation of doctors. It was a quieter, more reflective path, but one that allowed him to use his vast knowledge in a way that truly benefited others, shedding the burden of his past arrogance. As for Alara, the hospital administration, reeling from the crisis and deeply impressed by her extraordinary abilities, wasted no time. They offered her a newly created, highly prestigious position, the hospital's Chief Infrastructure and Resilience Officer. It was a role specifically tailored to her unique blend of nursing knowledge and engineering genius. This wasn't just a material reward, it was an acknowledgement of her unparalleled value, a chance to apply her talents on a systemic level, ensuring the hospital would never again be vulnerable to such a catastrophic failure. Her job now was not merely to fix problems, but to prevent them, to shape the hospital's future infrastructure, to build systems that were robust, intelligent, and, most importantly, patient-centered. It was the perfect opportunity, allowing her to reconcile her two worlds, the compassionate care of nursing and the intricate logic of engineering. Alara accepted, a quiet sense of triumph and purpose settling over her. Her internal conflict between her desire to remain unseen and her innate drive to do what was right had finally found resolution. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a bridge between medicine and machinery, a guardian of the hospital's very heartbeat. She found herself spending more time with Valerie, who had quickly become a close friend and trusted colleague. One evening, after a particularly productive day of planning upgrades for the hospital's power systems, they shared a quiet moment overlooking the bustling ER. The space was vibrant, alive, its machines humming with renewed energy, its staff moving with a sense of security they hadn't known before. "I still can't believe it," Valerie confessed, shaking her head in admiration. "All those years, and none of us, not even Thorne, saw what you truly were. How did you know all that? Alara, about the generator, about those old systems?" Alara smiled, a soft, poignant expression. "My grandfather," she began, her voice a little wistful. "He was a brilliant man, an engineer. He spent his life building and fixing things, especially old machinery. He worked at the city's power plant for decades, back when it was all manual, mechanical. He loved those old machines, said they had a soul. He taught me everything, how they breathed, how they groaned, how to coax life out of them when they seemed dead." She paused, her gaze drifting over the busy ER. "He taught me that understanding how things work, truly understanding them, is a form of care. Whether it's a human body or a giant engine, they both need attention, diligence, and a bit of coaxing. He always told me that the most important things are often the ones no one sees, the hidden gears that keep everything turning." She looked at Valerie, her eyes shining with a quiet resolve. "For a long time, I tried to keep those two worlds separate, the nurse and the engineer. I was afraid they wouldn't understand, afraid of being seen as different. But after what happened, after the blackout, I realized that both parts of me are essential, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies in embracing all of who you are, especially the parts that others might not initially understand." Valerie nodded slowly, a profound understanding dawning on her. "He would be so proud of you." "Alara," she said softly, reaching out to squeeze Alara's hand. "We all are." The ER continued its relentless rhythm below them, but now, beneath the surface, a new, stronger beat pulsed, a testament to integrity, an homage to forgotten knowledge, and a beacon of hope for a future built on genuine competence and true respect. Alara Vance, the quiet nurse, had finally found her true radiance, illuminating not just the hospital, but the very essence of what it meant to heal and to serve. 2 years later, St. Jude's Hospital was a testament to transformation. The lingering shadows of the Great Blackout and the systemic issues it exposed had long since faded, replaced by an unparalleled sense of resilience and innovation. Under Alara Vance's visionary guidance as Chief Infrastructure and Resilience Officer, the hospital had undergone a complete metamorphosis. It was no longer just a leading medical center. It was a state-of-the-art facility, renowned not just for its exceptional medical care, but for its cutting-edge, robust infrastructure. Every system, from power to data, was now designed with redundancy and foresight, a direct result of Alara's unique expertise. Alara moved through the hospital halls with a newfound confidence, a quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. Her scrubs had been replaced by a smart, functional uniform that subtly blended the practicalities of engineering with the compassionate professionalism of medicine. She was a respected and beloved figure, a quiet legend whose story had become a cornerstone of St. Jude's ethos. She had found a profound peace, reconciling her two identities, the compassionate nurse and the brilliant engineer. The internal conflict that had once silently gnawed at her had resolved into a powerful synergy, making her an indispensable part of the hospital's core. Her gaze, still as observant as ever, now carried a confident sparkle, reflecting the secure knowledge of her invaluable contribution. Her commitment to paying it forward became one of her most cherished endeavors, remembering her own grandfather's forgotten genius. Alara established the Grandfather's Gearhead Scholars Program within the hospital. This groundbreaking initiative funded full scholarships for underprivileged youth who demonstrated a natural aptitude for mechanics and engineering, especially those with an interest in healthcare infrastructure. The program wasn't just about financial aid, it was about mentorship. Alara personally mentored the scholarship recipients, spending hours in the newly built, state-of-the-art engineering labs, teaching them about both the complex science of machines and the profound art of compassionate care. Machines, like people, have their own needs, their own vulnerabilities, she would often tell them, her voice soft but filled with deep conviction. Understanding how they work, how to maintain them, how to fix them when they break. That's just as vital in a hospital as understanding anatomy. It's all about keeping things running, keeping people safe. She taught them the importance of diligence, observation, and the silent, essential role of those who work behind the scenes. She imbued in them a sense of pride in their skills, emphasizing that true impact often comes from unseen hands. Many of her gearhead scholars went on to pursue careers in biomedical engineering, hospital facilities management, and even advanced robotics, carrying Alara's legacy into new frontiers. Dr. Julian Thorne, having shed his arrogance and embraced his new role, became a staunch supporter of Alara's program. He often lectured to the scholars, sharing cautionary tales of his own past mistakes and emphasizing the critical importance of a holistic approach to patient care, one that recognized the vital interconnectedness of medical expertise and robust infrastructure. Valerie Chen, now Chief Operating Officer, worked closely with Alara, implementing sustainable practices across the hospital and actively championing the gearhead scholars, ensuring they had the resources and opportunities to thrive. Liam, the former orderly who had witnessed Alara's quiet heroism firsthand, was now a project manager in Alara's department, his initial admiration having solidified into unwavering loyalty and a shared passion for resilient hospital systems. The story culminates on a crisp, bright morning. Alara stood in the now well-maintained, meticulously organized generator room in the sub-basement. It was no longer a forgotten, dusty space, but a testament to vital infrastructure, gleaming with fresh paint and regularly serviced machinery, the old auxiliary generator, which had once been her silent companion in the darkness, now hummed with a powerful, consistent rhythm, its polished metal casing reflecting the overhead lights. It was a symbol of strength, of endurance, of life sustained against all odds. Ilara traced a hand over the cool, smooth metal of the old auxiliary generator, a faint, contented smile on her face. Her journey, from the shadows of humiliation to the radiance of respect, had come full circle. On its side, a small, polished brass plaque gleamed, its inscription a simple yet profound tribute. In memory of Thomas Vance, the Unseen Hands, whose legacy continues to power lives. It was a final, symbolic image, embodying the core theme of the story that true worth often resides in the quietest corners, that forgotten wisdom can save futures, and that the unseen hands, guided by compassion and brilliance, are often the ones that truly keep the world turning. Ilara, the keeper of the flame, had ensured her grandfather's legacy, and her own, would shine brightly for generations to come. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.